Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody. I got another treat for you. Margaret Donovan is a visiting lecturer at Yale Law School. She's a practicing attorney. She served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Connecticut, and before that, 6 years in the United States Army and as a captain in the Judge Advocate General Corps, the JAG Corps. On top of that, she is out there really, writing and talking about this moment we're in. You can find her stuff sometimes in Just Security, and she's been on television a bunch lately talking about these issues. Margaret, I'm delighted you're with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I want to talk about the erosion of the rule of law in the military. I guess the firing of the JAG officers, the attempts to politicize our armed forces, the attacks on ships in the Caribbean, and oh my gosh, we might recall to active duty Senator Kelly and then court-martial him. What do you make of all of this?
Well, it's where to begin.
Right? I think the White House is where this all begins, but yeah.
Yeah, it's tragic. It really is tragic because, as you stated, I'm a former JAG officer. I'm also a former federal prosecutor. And one of the things I've deployed to Iraq, I've gone to Syria, I've deployed to West Africa. One of the things that sets the United States military apart from all other militaries in the world, the quality that makes us really supreme and unimpeachable when we go to war or when we engage in any type of overseas operations is our adherence to the rule of law, is the knowledge that we can win with force, with lethality, with violence of action, all while following the rules. And we have upheld this for decades. Really, since the Geneva Conventions in 1949, the U.S. has signed and ratified. That's a set of treaties that the international community established in the wake of World War II, when globally, everybody was sort of coming out of the fog of war, the actual fog of war, and realizing that we never wanted to repeat those mistakes. And so we signed what are called the Geneva Conventions 1 through 4 in 1949. And since then, we have codified that in domestic law in various ways. For example, the Department of Defense Law of War Manual cites back to the Geneva Conventions the rules of engagement that we write before any operation, whether it is the Gulf War or the 2003 invasion or the fight against the Islamic State. All of our rules of engagement have adhered to those baseline principles of humanity and respect and dignity for human life.
Let me stop for 1 second there.
Yes.
Because for the young and left-leaning in the audience who say, we do terrible things, our Army does awful things, you're not saying that terrible things never happen. You're saying that that we have rules of engagement, and when people go rogue, we hold them accountable.
Yes, precisely. War is bad. We shouldn't go to it. We should not just sort of casually embark in armed conflict. We should not start wars. We should limit ourselves to defense, to being the Department of Defense, by the way, which is how we first converted that name, that we were only going to defend ourselves against threats.
Turn the eagle's head around. Yeah.
Inevitably, civilians are caught in the crossfire, literally and figuratively, in warfare. And so that's why we should avoid it. So no doubt, every nation makes mistakes. The difference between the United States and some of our worst adversaries like Al-Qaeda, like the Islamic State, is that we hold ourselves to standards and we try to hold people accountable. Indeed, we have court-martialed people for war crimes before. Our own military has court-martialed its own. Now, what is happening right now is the head of the Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth, basically campaigned being almost like a provocateur of, kill, and conspiracy theories, but like a military brand of conspiracy theories. So he advocated that for people who were charged and in some cases convicted of war crimes to be pardoned. saying that basically there's some, misunderstanding or some secret agreement among people who testified against these people to put these people in these situations. So Goldstein, Clint Lawrence, these are some of the names that you may recognize. So in that sense, where we are, it's tragic, but it's also no surprise, I hate to say, because that is who Pete Hegseth is. He has written a book about it. He doesn't like lawyers. He doesn't like the rules of engagement. And so the Senate voted him in. And the Senate has the power to impeach him, and they are not. And so as frustrated as I, of course, am with the Secretary of Defense, you got to look at the Senate. I mean, that is who is in charge of installing him, of oversight of all of it.
I agree. I mean, and at least one of those senators from Iowa who thought she was standing up for women in the armed services confirmed him, and I think that's why she's not running again.
Yeah, I don't know how she sort of lives with herself after that.
So talk about Senator Kelly and what I mean, he said, along with others, hey, look, you can't obey illegal orders. And because of that, to just talk about what's happened.
So a quick rundown. A couple weeks ago, I think it was maybe the week before Thanksgiving, Senator Kelly and other lawmakers published a video. And the video was probably the least controversial content-wise that I could think of, you could say. Basically telling soldiers to follow the law. They said disobey, but that you should not follow unlawful orders. You should only follow lawful orders. That is cookie cutter statements. That is, I think they played as, and probably intentionally so, they played as within the lines as you could, talking to soldiers in that message. And of course, it caused an uproar of the administration and the administration's sort of sympathizers and supporters. And the only way, logically, that you can understand why telling soldiers to follow lawful orders would incense other people is if those other people wanted soldiers to follow unlawful orders. That is the only way logic would dictate that you would be angry about that.
Right.
So it was not illegal. It was not, it was protected by the First Amendment, and it was not controversial to begin with. So the one criticism that I had heard when that video first broke, which I don't agree with, but I at least understand, I can comprehend it, was, well, they should have said what orders were unlawful, because if you don't say what orders are unlawful, then you're just confusing troops, and maybe you're making them question their chain of command structure, and, the second, third, fourth order effect of that could be soldiers that are confused about what is lawful and unlawful. Fine. Giving that, any degree of credence, that sort of criticism, then you have the Thanksgiving weekend story, the Washington Post story break of the September 2nd strike, the double tap strike, as we're calling it. And now you have your answer. This is precisely what the lawmakers were worried about, were soldiers being led by somebody who doesn't believe in the rules of engagement, who has stated he doesn't think lawyers are useful, and putting troops who have seen legitimate warfare against terrorists across the globe in these scenarios where they are making very complicated, they have been given basically an untenable framework for how to conduct combat. So the message in itself, even the best criticism of it, is immediately answered when you look at
mooted immediately when somebody issues an illegal order the next day.
Yes. Yep. And that, so the response of the administration, I think, has been the more extreme story, as is, I'm telling you a tale as old as time right now in 2025, that the administration's response is more extreme than whatever the provoking act was. But they have threatened, Secretary Hegseth has threatened to court-martial Senator Kelly. Senator Kelly, among those 6 lawmakers, is the only one who, that I know of, is a retiree. And when you have retired from the military, you can actually be called back onto active duty to be court-martialed. There is a system and a process for doing that. It is unusual, but it certainly can happen. And oftentimes you see it happen when somebody is in a retirement status and they've done something horrific, a violent crime of some type. And for whatever reason, the state cannot prosecute them. Then you may see the military step in. to my knowledge, it has never happened for something that the state couldn't prosecute because it's protected by the First Amendment. And so the military is going to try to come in and prosecute it under, I think one of the offenses that they tossed out was contemptuous statements or something like that. Mm-hmm. So in and of itself, it's unusual to call a retiree back to do something like that. It is even more unusual. It happens to call, like I said, it happens that people get called back from into active status to be court-martialed. It's even more unusual that it happens based on First Amendment protected speech, but it's unheard of. It is unheard of that the executive branch would threaten a sitting United States senator who was speaking on behalf of his constituents and with the support of his constituents.
And urging that we follow the law.
And urging that we follow the law. So you have levels of First Amendment separation of powers issues there.
Yeah.
And so it is shocking. I personally do not think the prosecution has legs, that it will go anywhere.
No.
Believe it or not, there actually is an amount of due process sort of built into the military justice system.
Still left, yes.
Yes.
I mean, if they want to make Senator Kelly the Democratic nominee for president, this is the way to do it. But
completely.
He's a war hero and an astronaut. And he watched his wife get shot up, and for doing her job.
I mean, he's an actual profile in courage, and and he's sort of. I mean, I don't know. I don't really follow politics. I still don't, but
lucky you.
I hadn't really known about his career, followed him that closely.
He's not a braggart.
Yes. But now everybody knows about his career, and everybody can see the courage that he has standing up to the administration. Yeah. And so, I agree with you completely. I think, if anything, thanks for the platform. Now we know what leadership looks like.
I want to talk to you about one other thing in the time we have left, and that is, I don't know if you've been following what's called NSPM 7. I mean, Donald Trump issued an executive order to Pam Bondi to go after domestic terrorists. And this past week, she told us how she was going to do that, and it scared me to death. Would you talk about that? Would you first tell people what it is and talk about it?
Yes. So this is based on the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 7. Yep. And those are issued by presidents, and it basically instructs the executive branch agencies how to implement national security policy. And then each of the agencies, in this case the Department of Justice, may issue their own sort of marching orders as to how they're going to do that. And so what you're referring to is the memo that Attorney General Bondi published. I think it was on December 4th or so. It was fairly recently. Mm-hmm. And so in it, she is redefining what domestic terrorism is. And there's a few points about this that I just want to flag. If you haven't seen it, it's available online. You can Google it, or Edwin, I'm happy to send you my copy if you don't have a copy, but I'm fairly certain it's been publicly released. So it begins just by defining the domestic terrorism threat. And I just want to read you very quickly this definition and then have one comment about it. So she begins defining what the domestic terrorism threat is, and she says that it involves acts dangerous to human life that appear to be intended to intimidate a civilian population, influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. If you're thinking to yourself, it also goes into a definition defining terrorism, this is from the United States Code, as potentially destructive of critical infrastructure or key resources. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you are thinking to yourself, wow, that sounds a lot like a group of violent people who want to overthrow the U.S. Capitol and disrupt the election, you would be forgiven for recognizing the irony in that. But of course, there is no mention of the January 6th protesters, although I will note, and I have a few more comments on this, but I will note that the look-back period for this memo, basically Attorney General Bondi is telling DOJ assets like the FBI and her prosecutors to look back 5 years to identify this type of so-called domestic terrorism. So I certainly hope that they start looking back 5 years at January 6, 2021. But anyway, she is taking a view of domestic terrorism and sort of adding a gloss to it that is, in my opinion, a very dangerous and slippery slope. For example, she has given examples of what a domestic terrorism group might do. One of them is anti-Americanism, whatever that means, hostility towards traditional views on family, religion, and morality, anti-Christianity. So these are inflammatory terms in some sense, but they are so breezy and ill-defined. And the idea that whatever this administration views as, I'm going to just use this as an example, hostile towards traditional views on family, religion, or morality, that can categorize you as a domestic terrorist.
So if you are gay and proud, they could say you're a domestic terrorist.
I think that puts you under this guidance, a mark in that direction, yes. So this is...
If you are me and say Donald Trump's vision of America is out of keeping with our history, it puts me in the category of a domestic terrorist.
Yeah,
it's that broad.
It really leaves the door wide open for interpretation of those concepts. And
then what did they say? What is she saying? Once you can just catch anybody based on how what the boss says is American and our best interests and what a family is, what can they do? What powers is she saying they have?
So it's interesting because she has listed a bunch of offenses there, which, by the way, the Department of Justice has been prosecuting those offenses for eternity, basically. You know,
Yes.
There's nothing sort of, these are all legitimate offenses, assaulting, conspiracy, firearms offenses, things like that.
Yep.
Those are bread and butter federal criminal offenses. The difference is that in order to open an investigation and look into these offenses in normal times, you need basically a predicate. I can't just, and I'm putting on my former federal prosecutor hat here now. I couldn't just say, I just want to check and see if Edwin Eisendrath has committed mail fraud. So why don't I just cut a bunch of grand jury subpoenas, get a search warrant for his email, and go check it out? I can't do that without predication. I need some indication that you actually have committed a crime or there's a legitimate basis to investigate you. And so my concern with her listing all of these offenses and tying it to this new sort of wide open definition of domestic terrorism is that you can see how this will take traditionally First Amendment protected activity and now use that as a basis to open an investigation into somebody. So there is this sort of new predicate, so to speak, that you can use to bring all of the invasive power of the federal criminal process. Now, she has, I think, a footnote in here about just kidding, not First Amendment protected activity, but you can see how callously and sort of carelessly this administration treats the First Amendment when it comes to investigation.
And given that they now add this terrorism charge, if they catch anybody and they prosecute them, the time they spend incarcerated is much longer. So we're really talking about seriously hurting people.
That's exactly right. There's a part of the memo that basically says, if you were charged with these offenses and we've determined that you're a domestic terrorist, we, the Department of Justice, should be seeking a terrorism enhancement when we argue for you at sentencing. I have to say, I actually am interested to see that play out because the terrorism enhancement is something that will get litigated. Defense attorneys will say it doesn't apply. Prosecutors will say it does. And so it will ultimately be up to a judge at some point to determine whether or not somebody who took a hostile view towards traditional family and marriage is actually a terrorist. I think right now, I take a lot of faith in the in Article 3 courts and sort of the independent federal judicial branch, that they will recognize that this is a complete 180 in terms of how we've defined terrorism throughout the years. And this is another interesting sort of phenomenon that's been happening. And just to tie it back to where we started on the Venezuelan operations, something that we have seen this administration do, and this is an overused comparison, but it is straight out of George Orwell's 1984. It is simply redefining words and trying to control the populace through doing that. So by slapping the word terrorism on things, by calling drug cartels terrorism, by calling, you know, left-coded nonprofits terrorist groups or funding terrorism, it's a way to just sort of gloss over what protections these people may have actually had by using this super inflammatory word.
Yeah, dangerous, really dangerous. I worry on that we won't get to the litigation on the terrorism enhancement. I worry, Margaret, that faced with the potential of 20 years in jail, people who are innocent will just plea. They'll make a deal.
I mean, that's entirely possible, but that, to me, that is why it is really important for those in the legal profession to be paying attention to this type of thing. I know that the federal criminal defense bar is very tuned in to this policy, and I imagine that that somebody somewhere is going to litigate this as soon as they can. Also, most plea agreements, many federal districts do not allow or do not encourage plea agreements that are binding on a court. So we're once again in this position where a lot of weight is being put on the federal judiciary population. So it's not a great place to be. But you're right. I mean, you know, using this type of hammer and threatening these types of sentences, it could induce something that is probably far from what we understand justice to mean.
You have a life. You have a law firm. What is it that has motivated you in this moment to talk to me and this big audience, to go all over and talk about these issues? What's keeping you up and making you do this? Because you said politics isn't it. That's not your world.
It's not, and it's only to the extent that I'm completely, as everybody, as many people are, I think, completely devastated to see the lack of courage in today's politicians. But to be totally honest with you, I think it's a national emergency. And so I'm just trying to say as much as I can. I have a very unique perspective where I was a former JAG. I worked airstrikes. I have to tell you, never in my civilian life has that ever been relevant until now. I was a former federal prosecutor, so I was in the DOJ through the entire January 6th prosecution, and I think I and my law firm, by the way, who was sort of letting me, do this. I've taken on a bunch of pro bono cases. I represent a number of fired government officials. I just think that it is an all hands on deck moment for people who care about democracy, for people who care about the rule of law. And I'm trying to put every last effort I can into maintaining the truth and maintaining that making sure that people understand what terrorism is and isn't, what the rule of law is and isn't, what justice is and isn't. And so to the extent that I can do that, which is why I thank you very much for inviting me, because as you probably know, the 5 to 7 minute news segments, you can't really get all of this out. It's generally on these longer platforms.
That's why I do this. Yep.
Yeah. But I just think that it's incumbent on Americans to come together and to speak out peacefully and powerfully to assert ourselves. I mean, one of the most fascinating things that's happening right now, and I know this probably wasn't on our agenda, but jury nullification. It's one of the last.
That's what I began our show with.
Oh, really? Oh, man. Okay. Well, now
I absolutely began with jury nullification in comparing what happened in colonial America when they went after the folks at the Stamp Act with what's happened with all those people in my city of Chicago and in Washington who were, under attack by Greg Bovino and stood up and then got arrested for it. And the jury said, nope, sorry, we are not giving you an indictment. And or the people on the president's enemies list. They said, nope, sorry, not doing it.
It happened in the Northeast during the time of the Fugitive Slave Act as well. And so this is something you see, these inflection points in history, and
I am so happy that something that the non-lawyer me thought of gets your mark of approval. I'm going to be very proud of myself for the rest of the day, Margaret.
No, totally. But it's a really inspiring phenomenon because it's one of the last places that the citizenry really can assert itself in a truth to power moment. And it's something that you have to think back on the framers of the Constitution and realize, wow, that they understood the power of a jury of your peers. They understood, places where you can sort of flex your muscle and exert yourself as a government governed by the people. So it is really inspiring. I'm so glad that you covered that.
Those are the institutional ways that individuals have power, that, selected at random, lottery, have power. Americans have found, and in Chicago we certainly found this, that Americans have power outside of government too, if they're willing to stand up, if they're willing to protect their neighbors, if they're willing just to blow a whistle. It turns out that there are many, many, many ways, including the fabulous way that you are out there teaching about law and justice. But there are many ways that people can step up right now in this moment, and I'm so proud of Americans for doing it.
I couldn't agree more.
You have to come back. We have to do this again.
To be continued. We didn't even get to jury nullification yet.
No,
yes.
we did not. But we've run out of time. So thank you so much, Margaret. I really appreciate it. Hey, if people want to find your work, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my email is on my Yale website. You can find my law firm. My law firm is pretty notable for standing up to conspiracy theorists. We took on the Alex Jones case, so you can reach me that way. And I welcome collaboration back and all of that.
I mean, I read a piece of yours in Just Security.
Oh, yes.
Your stuff is out there.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much. Really a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.